IPMNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new.
Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, depending on when you're listening to this. This is Dr. John. You've gotten on to Dr. John's Neighborhood once again. I'm excited to be completing this series of talks about money issues. I think that there's some good information in here. A little review. We talked before about all of the different reasons that having financial issues can be difficult for people. A lot of them have to do with the stress that comes around when people are worried about paying their bills or meeting the financial demands that they have. I know that it's starting to stress me out to think about helping my kids pay for college and things like that. And if you look on my website, drjohnrich.com, there's an article called How Poverty Affects Children, the Stresses of Poverty and Its Impact on Parenting. So that's at drjohnrich.com/poverty-affects-children. And I am talking about some research out there that discusses a concept called behavioral bottlenecks. The idea behind behavioral bottlenecks is that stress impacts our parenting by giving us fewer resources, emotional resources, and energy to put into the kinds of positive parenting practices that I am always trying to write about. What do I mean by positive parenting practices? Well, generally we're talking about sensitivity, so recognizing when your child is upset or recognizing their emotions and being sensitive to what their emotions are, and responsiveness, being able to respond to what's going on in a thoughtful manner. You've probably heard the expression teachable moments. Well, if you have the time and the energy to look at a mistake that your child's made or some kind of situation your child is in and reflect on it with your child, that's called a teachable moment. But if you are busy all of the time or you're worried all of the time, you're actually more likely to use parenting practices that are quick and easy and can be done in a short amount of time. So things like spanking or yelling or leave me alone, stuff like that. And even if you're somebody out there who thinks that spanking is perfectly okay, I always try to ask people to think about the fact that most of the time when we spank our children, we don't give them any information about how they should act in similar situations in the future. And so if you're having money issues and those money issues are taking away your energy to be able to capitalize on teachable moments with your child, then you're not spanking them for their own good, you're spanking them for your own good. That's my opinion about it, and take that however you would like. So far we've talked about the importance of budgeting. We've talked about how once you have a truthful look at your budget, that you can now take the two sides of the budget, namely the income side and the expenses side, and try to work a little magic so that the expenses go down and the income goes up, with the first goal being that your income is at least equal to your expenses. This is what government officials like to call a balanced budget. I don't know of any state government out there or local government that actually has a balanced budget, but they're always trying to make individuals feel guilty about the choices that they make, and then now we're running up huge deficits. But anyway, that is a little bit of a tangent. So we spent a lot of time talking about decreasing expenses. We talked about credit cards. We talked about going through the budget line by line and making phone calls to see whether the people who are your debtors are willing to refinance or change the terms of what you're paying them. We talked about some websites that you could go to, including Crazy Coupon Lady and Top Cash Back and Gift Card Granny. And so today, to wrap this up, I want to talk about the income side. So it seems like it could come across as arrogant to make the following statement, and yet I'm going to make it. And that is that anybody who puts some time into it can find extra income. Now, I do want to say one thing, and that is that just because you can make extra money doesn't mean that you should make extra money. So I have a friend, and this friend would describe himself as a workaholic. And he has reflected before about how many times he's found himself working and working and working and working and then missing out on things that were going on with his family. He talks about how he's worried that one day he's going to look back and regret that he missed his kids' sporting events, or he missed some kind of thing at school, or he didn't have the time to go out and play ball with them as much as he wanted to. You've always heard that, you may have heard the expression that, nobody on their deathbed says, I wish I had spent more time at the office. And so on the one hand, I'm saying that if you're in a financial situation where you need to make some changes and work on your budget, and part of what needs to happen is that you need to make some extra income, then by all means, I think that children understand that we need to work. And if the reason that you're going to work is to keep everybody afloat and make sure that they have enough shelter and food to eat, and that you can have some of the good things in life, then I think, that's probably the best thing for you to do. But if you're thinking about taking on extra work just for the sake of having more money, and your reflection is that that is going to get in the way of the time you have available, especially for your children, then I would ask you to think long and hard about what your priorities are. In my own life, I have two sons. One of them's 13 and one of them's 14. And we're going to talk in a second about real estate and investing in real estate, which is something that I've been involved in the past. And currently I have some temptations to get back into the real estate game because there's good money to be made there. And yet I have two children in my house, one of whom is going to be moving out in 3 years, and the other one's going to be moving out in 5 years. And in 5 years, I'm only going to be 55. Some of you out there are thinking, 55? Yeah, well, 55 still gives me, however many years left before I'm dead. 20 years, 25 years maybe. Maybe even longer, who knows. But let's say I got 75 years on this earth. I'm thinking that maybe the best decision for me is that even though I could make some money over the next 5 years in real estate, the amount of time that I'm going to have to put into all of the work involved is going to pull me out of the house and not allow me to take advantage of these next 5 years with my 2 children. I mean, once they move out, they probably don't really care how busy I am. They're going to be living their own lives, and at that point, I have a little bit more freedom to go after extra money and go after things that I enjoy. So that said, if you take your budget and then you use some of the tactics that I've been teaching you to lower your expenses, and then you adjust the line items in your expense column, and you're still short, well, then it's time to start thinking about finding another job on a part-time basis, or finding some extra income from some other sources, or perhaps using some money that you have saved up to get involved in some investing. So let's jump into that. I've been talking to you about some websites, and the first one that I want to talk to you about is going to seem kind of strange since I am a man, and but the website is called theworkathomewife.com. So that's the word the, work, W-O-R-K, at A-T, home, H-O-M-E, wife, W-I-F-E.com. theworkathomewife.com. This is not a site that's just for women. It's a site for people who want to make some extra money, and most of the opportunities are opportunities where you can make money without having to go into an office. So pause the show for a second if you're listening to this on demand, and go to that website so that you can see the same thing that I'm seeing here. So when you go to the Work at Home Wife, you'll see a number of links, and there are all sorts of things that you can do. You go down a little bit, there's a place where you can click that says, I want to work from home part-time. There's another place where you can click that says, I want to work from home full-time. There's something that says, I just need some extra cash, and then there's another one about being a blogger. So I've clicked on the extra cash opportunities just so you can see some of these things that this woman is talking about. There's a place where you can give your email address, and then literally every day she sends an entire list of places that are looking for people to help them with various odd jobs. Most of them involve a computer and some internet access, and you can sort through those and apply for any that you want. So right away there's an article called Need Money Now, 10 Ways to Get the Cash You Need Fast. There's another one talking about how to get involved in selling textbooks. There's a way to get paid to watch videos. There are some apps that pay you money. There's a review of a site called Eboda, which I don't use, but I know people who do. And there's ways to complete surveys for money, although they don't pay you very much. And there's other types of opportunities here. Now, if we go back, and I'm operating under the assumption that you don't need full-time work, you need part-time work. So under the part-time link, ways to earn money online without quitting your day job. That's a pretty exhaustive article. Proofreading jobs. Awesome jobs for stay-at-home moms or dads. Virtual assistant jobs. I don't know if you know anything about virtual assistants, but there are people who have blogs or have companies, and they need people to take care of some of the more mundane tasks so they can be free to do the higher level thinking about the work that they're doing. Make $1,000 a month online. Make money online with online tutoring jobs. So There's a wealth of information on this site, and of course you can do your own Google search about work-at-home opportunities, and I've done that myself, but I feel like this is one of the better ones. Since we just talked about making money with online tutoring jobs, I want to point you to another site that I have used, and the name of the site is wyzant.com. So that's WYZANT. So wyzant.com is a place where you can apply to be a tutor. And tutoring does not have to be tutoring in an academic subject. There are ways to do tutoring about more, hobbies and things like that. But primarily, we're talking about tutoring academic subjects. But some of the academic subjects that you can tutor people in are like third grade math. I think most adults would be able to handle that. And so what you do is when you put your information in, then you select the subjects where you feel like you would be able to tutor people, and then they give you a test, and if you pass the test, then they certify you on the site as somebody who is qualified. And then, of course, like any business, Wyzant takes a percentage of the amount of money that you charge, and that percentage goes down the more opportunities you take. So I really like that site, and if you reflect on some subjects where you feel like you would be able to help other people with their children, or even help people who are in school learning English, who need a tutor to help them with their English skills, then that's definitely a place where you can go. So despite the fact that Craigslist has kind of a seedy reputation, Craigslist does have jobs. I don't know if you've ever been to Craigslist, but if you go to Craigslist and then choose the metropolitan area nearest you, or in the case of Delaware, where I live, it's just Delaware. We're so small that it's just like one page for our entire state. But there, over on the right, is a whole column about jobs that people have. So, there are some opportunities for you to make extra money. Of course, there are the typical ones too, where you can look in the paper, etc. But those are ones that maybe you hadn't heard of before. So the final section that I wanted to talk about was, if you get to the point where you have a surplus, what are some thoughts that you for what you can do with that surplus? So here are a couple tips that I have based upon the research and thinking that I've done about money in my almost 50 years. First of all, there seems to be a rule of thumb out there that before you start investing extra money, you need to have liquid cash in a bank account that you can easily access, equal to somewhere between 3 and 6 months of your expenses, just in case. So you take your expenses, and if we're going to be conservative and talk about trying to have 6 months of liquidity, then you look at your expense column, and that's the yearly amount of money that you need for expenses. So then just divide that in half, because 6 months is half of a year. And then before you start putting money away that you can't tap into if there was a crisis or if you lost your job, a lot of people suggest that you just build your bank account until you have that cushion to protect you just in case. So that's the first thing that I would say. The next thing that I would say is related to something that we talked about earlier, which is, now let's say that you've got a surplus and you also have 3 to 6 months of money sitting in your account, and you want to start taking the surplus moving forward on a month-to-month basis and do something with it. Well, I would take a look at your expense column and, as we've discussed, rank order all your debts by their interest rate and just start paying down debt. That's an easy way to work on your budget. And unlike things like the stock market where you have no idea what percentage of interest you're going to make because you don't know what the stock market is going to do, you have a surefire way of knowing how much money you're going to make because you know what the interest rate is. So think of it this way. If you have a credit card that's charging you 22% interest, and you take a surplus and start paying down that credit card, in essence, you're making 22% on your money. Let that sink in for a second. You can keep the money, you can keep the surplus in your bank, and it's going to earn a measly 0.25% interest, and meanwhile, the credit card company is tacking on 22% interest onto what you owe them that eventually you're going to have to pay. Or you can take that surplus and pay down the credit card by the amount of the surplus, and then you're not paying the 22% interest on the amount that you just sent them. So, now if you don't have any credit cards, and I would strongly encourage you to work on your credit card debt before you do anything else except for your mortgages, and now maybe take a look at your mortgage. I don't know what percentage you're paying on your mortgage, but if you're paying 7% on your mortgage, first of all, you should refinance that shit because you could probably refinance it for somewhere between 4.5% and 5%, and your monthly payment would go down. That belongs under the column of taking a look at your expenses and making a phone call to try to work the expenses column down to a lower number. As long as you have equity in your house, if your mortgage interest rate is anywhere at 7% or higher, you really should get in touch with a lender and try to refinance. But let's say you can't refinance for some reason, maybe your credit isn't good and nobody's going to lend you money or something like that, and you're paying a mortgage payment at 7%, then if you take your surplus and just send them some extra money to go toward the principal, then you're making 7% on your money. It would be fairly difficult to make 7% in our current financial environment, and so that might be something for you to think about. Student loans, I don't know what you're paying on that, but basically the first place that I would put money if I had is to pay down high interest debt. So you're not in that situation, then you have a couple other alternatives. You maybe have a 401k plan with your company if you're working for a company. You should look into whether your employer will match up to a certain amount of money. So they may have a policy where they'll match your deposits into a 401k up to, let's say, $5,000. So now you're going to get two benefits from investing. So let's say you want to invest $5,000. Maybe you have a surplus, and on a monthly basis you can put away, let's say, $400 a month. That's going to be $4,800. The first benefit that you're going to get is that withdrawal into the 401k is going to come off of your gross so that you're paying taxes on a smaller amount. If you're telling them, take $400 and put it into my 401k, and you make, let's say, $4,000 a month, well, now you're not going to be taxed on $4,000 a month, you're going to be taxed on $3,600 a month. So if you're paying at a 15% tax rate, then the $400 right there, right at the start, you're making 15% on your money. Now, of course, there's always the danger that the stock market crashes and you lose the value of the money that you put in there, but that's the risk that most investments are going to have. But then on top of the tax advantages to putting money aside into a 401k or also a Roth IRA, and individual retirement account. You can put money in a Roth IRA, and that will come off of your gross so that you're not paying taxes on it. In addition to the tax advantages of doing that, if your employer is going to match deposits into your 401k, then that $5,000 that you're going to deposit is automatically going to turn into $10,000 by the employer match. So think about that. 15% of $5,000 is $750. So you're making $750 basically because you're not going to be paying tax on the $5,000 that you're depositing. And then you're also going to get the extra $5,000 from your employer. So you're going to take $5,000 and in 1 year you're going to turn that into $10,750. That's phenomenal. You're not even going to make that kind of money in real estate, not in 1 year, unless you're doing something really risky and you hit the jackpot. So finally, I would encourage you to think about real estate. All of the wealth that I've made in my life has come from real estate. Back when I was in my 30s, I had rental properties. I had about 35 of them, and I did quite well. And that money is the reason that I can live in the house that I live in and have the things that I have. I don't regret real estate at all, but it is, being a landlord is some work. And there's also the risk that you buy when the real estate market is high and then the real estate prices go down. So another reason that I'm thinking I won't get into real estate right now is in addition to wanting to spend the time with my children while they're still living with me, is that it feels like the real estate market and the stock market, every kind of market out there, is a little overheated. And I would rather wait to pick something up after things settle down a bit. But generally, the rule of thumb is with real estate, if you're talking about a rental, and I don't encourage any newbie to get into flipping houses or anything. That's a lot more complicated than it looks like on HGTV. Is that you're going to take a look at a property that's for sale, and you're going to do a little bit of research to try to determine what kind of rent you could get on the property. And so here's the basic calculation before we wrap up and go to commercial. You're going to take the amount of rent that you could collect on the property, and then you're going to multiply that by 12 because you'd be presumably collecting rent for 12 months. And then I would personally take the amount that you get and multiply that by 70%. Why 70%? Well, you need to set aside money for repairs. You need to set aside some money in case you have a vacancy. You've got taxes, you've got insurance, you've got maybe a license that you have to buy from the local government. So let's take a hypothetical example. We have a property and we're pretty sure that we could rent it for $1,000 a month. Let's make this easy math. So $1,000 a month represents $12,000 over the course of the year. And then you take $12,000 times 70%, and the gross amount of money that you're going to bring in is $8,400. Now, unless you've got a chunk of money that's going to allow you to buy this property all cash and not have a loan, and I wouldn't even encourage that because the secret to real estate wealth is to leverage borrowing in order to make cash on the other side, you're going to need to have a mortgage. So now what you need to do is you need to figure out how much the mortgage is going to cost on the property that you're buying. So let's say you have a $100,000 house that you're buying. It's going to make you $1,000 of rent. We just did our calculations. You're going to end up with $8,400 after you set aside your expenses. That $100,000 property is going to require you to put 20% down. So you're going to need to come up with $20,000 somehow. And then we'll tack on another $5,000 for your closing costs. So it's going to cost you $25,000 out of pocket to buy this $100,000 house, and you're going to have a mortgage of $80,000. So you can go to a website like bankrate.com and go to a mortgage calculator, and you could just put in that a 30-year mortgage at, let's say, 6%, because investment properties are a little bit higher than residential properties, $80,000 for 30 years at 6%, you can calculate what that monthly payment is going to be. My guess is that the monthly payment on $80,000 at 6% is going to be about $500 a month. So now you take your $8,400 that you know you're going to net after your expenses, and then you take $500 a month times 12 months that you'll be paying that loan. That's $6,000. $8,400 minus $6,000 is a surplus, a cash flow of $2,400. So $2,400 a year. You divide that into the $25,000 you had to put out. That's close to a 10% return on your money. It's pretty good. Not to mention the fact that the tenant that you're going to have in there is going to be helping you pay down your debt. Not to mention all the incredible tax advantages that you get from owning investment real estate. So that's, in a nutshell, the real estate situation. If you're interested in that, you can shoot me an email and maybe we can talk about real estate together. Or I would highly encourage you to pick up a book. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That was the book that inspired me to get into real estate to begin with, and I think it's still pretty valuable for talking about how much better real estate is than a lot of other investment vehicles, just because of all of the extra things that you get along the way. So that's it. That's the end of our first half hour, and it's also the end of our segment on money. I'm not sure quite off the top of my head what I'm going to talk about next time, but I have been getting some emails from people with ideas about topics that they want me to discuss, so I'm going to take a look at those and maybe we'll talk about that. But right now we're going to go to commercial, and then when we come back, we will have our guest. We're going to talk to an old college friend of mine named Carol Robidoux, who's doing a whole bunch of really great things in New Hampshire and is really the person who gave me my first break when I decided to start my website and start putting ideas out there about parenting. So I'm looking forward to talking to her. She's a very kind and generous person, and I have a feeling that you're going to be inspired when you hear some of the ways that she thinks about the world. All right, talk to you after the commercial. I'll catch you on the flip side. It's corny.
10 years ago, the energy market was deregulated. This opened the market to new suppliers. Ambit Energy is one of those suppliers. Go to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com and see how you can not only get free energy by switching to Ambit, you can also earn travel reward points while lowering your utility bills. Learn more by going to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com. Start saving today.
ipmnation.com.
All right, we're back from commercial. Thanks for sticking around. I have on the line Carol Robidoux, who's actually an old friend of mine from community college back in the day. Say hi, Carol.
Hey, how you doing, John and friends?
Yeah, I'm all right. So I'm happy to have you on the show, and just as a little precursor, I mean, I feel like the thing that you can add most to these conversations that we've been having with people about the work that they're doing is just that, in my opinion, you're a very kind and gracious person, and you're very good with making people feel supported and trying to help people. It seems like that's a real big motivation for you, and it's pretty infectious. So I'm happy to have you on the show.
Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you asking me, and thanks for the kind words. And yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist by trade. I became a journalist a little bit later in life. That's what I was doing at the community college, was reshaping my life as an adult with a couple of kids, and eventually did become a working journalist. And then, as we all know, the that industry started to tank. So I had to reinvent myself a little bit. I'm still a journalist, but I started my own news media site called ManchesterIncLink.com.
Up in New Hampshire, right?
Up here in Manchester, New Hampshire. And it's all online, and it's considered a hyper-local news source, so the focus is on our city and extends to the state at times. But that kind of goes along with what you're saying is my mission these days isn't to really keep up with the worst of the worst news or do some gotcha journalism, but really the focus, I guess I would say, is on something more like solutions journalism and creating a sense of community in a place where we live and work.
So
and
what
being
is,
a credible source.
I'm sorry. So what's solutions journalism? I haven't heard that term.
That's a sort of a burgeoning thing, but it's a process where journalists will admit, longtime journalists will tell you that whenever they're writing stories about what's wrong with any institution or any given part of segment of society, you always feel like there's something missing in that equation when you write about, how somebody, perpetrated fraud or somebody corrupted in the government and there's bad players and bad actors, or how the school district is failing our children or whatever.
You were talking about you have a big issue with the opioids up there, right?
I mean,
so how would solutions?
We have been in the spotlight, but I will say it is a national epidemic at this point.
Yeah. So how would solutions journalism approach the stories about the opioid crisis? Like, what makes solutions journalism different than just giving you facts and figures about the problem?
Well, one of the parts of that process is trying to figure out what could help or what might work, and what's the fallout from that. So the fallout from the opioid crisis here in New Hampshire has been, increase in crime, increase in homelessness and the panhandling population visibly on the streets, increase in diseases like Hep C and other communicable diseases and needle-borne diseases. And homelessness, joblessness, all of those things contribute to what amounts. And kids in crisis. That's probably the biggest part, is that we have a generation of children now who are born into addiction because their parents were using at the time of their birth,
right,
or children were abandoned because their parents have been sent to prison or off to rehab or disappeared or dead, and then they have no real adult supervision. We don't have enough foster families available, and sometimes grandparents may not be the ideal guardians of these children. So it's just, there's a lot of layers there, and I think as a solutions approach to that, it is looking at a few different things, like what kinds of innovative programs are out there. In Texas, I think a few years ago, they started a program where the city, a certain city in Texas, started to hire people who were street people, homeless people, to work to clean up the streets. They gave them jobs with benefits and created housing for them, and found that a majority of the people who accepted the challenge rose to the challenge and became contributing members of society, and that opportunity solved some of the immediate problems that kept them stuck in addiction. And that program's been piloted up here in Maine last year. And so in studying that, I brought that to the attention of one of our city aldermen, which is like a city councilor who's trying to find new ideas. And I proposed to him that he present the idea of piloting that program here after researching it himself, if he thought it was a worthy idea, that there's plenty of data now on how that kind of a program can work. And he's interested. So, I mean, if he does, then I'll start writing stories about the process of initiating a pilot program that might get some people, permanent housing, job experience, benefits, things that they're not getting by being part of the existing system. And that's like just one example.
Yeah. So, but you feel like that would be more effective than just judging them and feeling a feeling of disgust when you walk by? That's sarcasm.
Well, what we do is, we basically criminalize people who are struggling with addiction, because whenever they're arrested, we put their pictures out there. We say this person is a heroin addict and they were arrested and they're going to be sent to prison. There's not enough follow up to see what happens to people. There's certainly people recovering from addiction, but the focus is always on the dark side, and a lot of publications will give you 24 hours in the streets, and then they show you lots of people shooting heroin and talking about their life is so bleak and all the problems that they have, and that's reality. And it's like that series Scared Straight from back in the day, when you went through a prison and saw how horrible it was to be incarcerated, to scare kids out of doing bad things. But if we fail to address the things that catch people in these cycles before it happens, and one of those things experts say is we need more prevention and more education to prevent the next generation from becoming victims of addiction or lost to addiction. We either believe that addiction is an illness, deep addiction is an illness of some sort, or not. If it's an illness, then we need to address that people are sick and need help somehow, and we don't have the resources.
So as somebody who is having this conversation online, because in addition to, it's a website that you're doing it on, and you have your Facebook page and all that other stuff. My experience in the writing that I've been doing for my site and doing this show is that when I begin advocating for kindness or graciousness or giving people the benefit of the doubt, there are always people out there whose response is more tough love, kind of. It almost seems like they're getting a feeling of glee by trying to smack down my attempt at niceness and saying, well, these people just need a slap in the face, or their parents didn't spank them and that's why they're spoiled and all. Do you get those kinds of reactions as well?
There's always a faction of the population who see this as a personal failure, and we shouldn't be giving handouts to people who are choosing to put poison in their veins. Let the process weed out the weak and let them die. Don't revive them with Narcan. Don't give them clean needles to prevent disease. We just need to put them someplace like a leper's island and let them fade themselves out.
So what do you say to that argument?
I just think it's what do I say? It's hard. I've learned, as with politics, that there's certain things you can't argue anybody into. I don't think anybody could argue me into changing my mind about the fact that I feel, a lot of people who suffer with addiction for whatever reason have trauma-based childhood experiences that, for me, I always imagine that there's a place inside of us sometimes when we're really wounded, where before we had the words to identify what it was that wounded us, we felt wounded to the point where in our adult life, we don't have the language to describe it or fix it. So we turn to substances, or we turn to destructive behaviors, because we don't know how to even verbalize the pain that we feel. And opioids, as we know, are probably the most powerful, pain vanquisher known to man. You take some opioids and it's like Christmas morning every day. So if you're suffering from emotional pain, physical pain, any kind of pain, it's not surprising. But I also feel, when we talk about opioids, the number of people who are addicted to opioids, I don't think those people would be addicted to opioids had there not been a lot of marketing and promotion on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry, a decade ago or more, 15 years ago, that led physicians to overprescribing and led people down a path and made all of these drugs abundantly available on the street illegally. And so I feel many states, including New Hampshire, have lawsuits against the pharmaceuticals, including Purdue. And so I'm hoping the outcome of that is that Purdue has to produce a big pile of money that can go toward the kind of infrastructure needed to create long-term recovery options for people, so that they have the time to not only detox and do away with their physical addiction, but also to go deeper and untangle the psychological and other traumatic things in their lives that have led them to need an outlet like a pain dulling substance,
Yeah.
And that's what's needed. The programs that exist now are very short term, or very much medicine driven. So you get on outpatient treatment, you take some kind of Suboxone or some other synthetic opioid to get you off of the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot of untangling there. And that's the part that's missing.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from having studied addiction, and I even have a class where there's a unit where I talk about it. There's no doubt that most people who get addicted to things that really, for lack of a better phrase, fuck them up, that really like make them unconscious, are starting those behaviors out of some need to turn off the visions or the voices of trauma that are going on in their head. But then on a biochemical level, once you're hooked, you can want to stop, but your body is really fighting against you tooth and nail to get you to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, don't we have like opioid receptors in our brain, or we have things like when you get the runner's high. There's parts of our brain that respond to these things, and so it's once you physiologically have stimulated those receptors with this potent drug, it's hard to get that out of your system. It's hard to turn that off.
Yeah, so I don't know what argument there can be, although, I mean, I know what the arguments are, but I don't know why you would want to argue that a person who initially partakes in these substances because of what has happened to them, to dull that pain, why you would want to be judgmental against that. But even if you want to be judgmental because you're going to say, well, I had things happen to me and I didn't turn to the needle, whatever, then why be judgmental after they're already addicted and it's so difficult for people to stop it? There are people who want to stop, and it's just so terrible. So I'm having a hard time in this business understanding people who want to make arguments, not that we should be kinder and more understanding, but that we should be meaner and more judgmental.
Well, think about, too, I mean, alcohol is still the biggest problem in New Hampshire and probably most of the United States when we're talking about addiction issues and the number of people who are attending an alcohol anonymous type group or something. And there's many, many people in recovery from alcohol, many, many people who still struggle with alcohol and will continue to. Somehow we don't look at alcohol the same way because it's a legal substance,
right,
over age 21. But even opioids and, poppies, things like that. I mean, there was a time and a place in history where it was just another pleasurable way to spend the afternoon, or whatever. I mean, there's something about the United States and our relationship with these drugs that have made our country stand out as a place where these epidemics happen. You're not seeing an opioid crisis in other countries at the moment. It's here. And, the idea that we had a war on drugs and that there's so much history and so much to understand about the government's role in creating prohibitions that then create criminalizations and then that create a black market and so there's it's very complicated for anybody that thinks they have the simple answer to this. I just think they just don't know enough about it. They haven't thought hard enough about it, or they just don't understand the human condition at this moment. And it's bad. It's complicated, and we have to ask ourselves, why are so many people in pain, some sort of pain that they need, they seek some sort of relief from it, whether it's legitimately through a physician seeking, relief from physical pain with an oxy drug, or people who feel that they can't function without a substance, a constant supply of a substance to make them not feel pain. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a bigger question. Even it's the same with the school shootings. We talk about, should we ban guns? Should we do this? Should we do that? We got a lot of problems to solve there. But one of the bigger questions is why, and this is predominantly young men, why do we have so many young men who take a giant gun and feel like they have to prove something or solve something in their own mind by mass murder against children in a school? Is it because the school environment was so painful to them? I don't know. But there's greater questions there to be answered. And it's easy to say we need armed guards at schools, or we need teachers to have guns, or we need no more guns. But there's more there. We just don't like to dip our toes into that pool often enough, as far as why are we as human beings suffering so much that we're causing problems.
Well, and then the more complex it is, the less hope you feel like you're going to be able to solve it. I think people want to solve it. So I want to shift, even though this is going to seem like a big shift in the conversation. In my mind, it's not a shift in the conversation because we're still talking about kindness and helping other people and trying to meet people where they are. But the reason that I want to do it is just because we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about something that more of the listeners might be able to apply to their own lives in case they don't know anybody who's suffering from an opioid addiction. That was an important conversation in terms of, having compassion for people who are having trouble. But we talked before the show about how when you were younger, when your kids were younger, that you would have a lot of their friends. They would come over to your house, and some of them seemed like they look at you like a second mother or whatever. So can you just talk a little bit about that being just a part of, I don't know, not your personality, but like a part of an overall desire that you have to try to be a person that other people can trust, that they feel safe talking to, etc.?
Sure. Well, so I have 4 children, and I think my husband and I always sort of approached parenthood as, doing whatever we could to make sure our kids' lives were as positive as they could be. And that starts early on, with the decisions you make about how you're going to discipline them, or how you're going to feed them, or how you're going to sleep with them or not. These life-changing decisions, like if you let your baby cry it out, they're going to be more independent, where we always felt, if you comfort a child who doesn't know how else to express themselves, eventually, they're going to feel secure because they're never left in a dark room crying with no one hearing them. So that just translated to teenagerhood. I think our kids always grew up feeling secure in their relationship with us, and that we were there for them as guides or people who respected them mutually, and there wasn't any problem that couldn't be solved or discussed, because there's love, first and foremost, and caring, and that we just want them to be able to be independent, happy adults someday. So as your kids get older, they start to, they need some place to be as teenagers, because there's most public spaces are not friendly to teenagers. If there's more than 4 teenagers hanging around somewhere, it's a gang, and
right.
It's a problem, and people get scared. But so we would often find our home was the magnet for kids over the many years that we were raising children. And in the context of that, you'd offer a kid a meal or a snack, or, you want to spend the night because your parents aren't home. You're welcome to stay here, or, little gestures like that resonate with kids who need that kind of thing. And you find there's actually a great need among children. The majority of our kids' friends, I would say, came from families that had been broken and patched up in different ways, whether it was second marriages or step families and all of that. And that creates a whole new dynamic for a teenager to process. And sometimes they just want to be in a place where things feel a little more sturdy or solid. So that was really just the experience that we had, was showing love and kindness to kids who would come into our house at various stages of their development and need. And some of those kids became permanent residents over the years. Whether my kids were here or not, we have one now, a young woman who's approaching 25, but came back after not being here for a while, but she was in a position where she just needed a place to be for a short period of time. And she has a lot of things to work out, but she's here and she's stable and she's part of the family for now, and she'll move on. But they always, it means something to a child, to know that somebody loves them and doesn't really judge them at the time in their life when they're going through a difficulty.
So I'm thinking about these people out there that like to troll and put these negative comments like we were talking about before. And I can hear them saying, well, that's not my responsibility. Like if they grow up in a home and their parents aren't treating them well, I got my own shit to do, and that's not on me. So what would you say to that person?
I mean, so I can reflect on people who had families that were decent families, but the problem is their own parents were so busy or preoccupied with their own shit, as you would say, that the well-being or the understanding that a child pretty much through adulthood, probably through the age of 24 or 25 in young adulthood, they still need to learn some things. And there are things that are different now than they were then, whenever now and then means to the listener. But for me, I came up at a time when most moms were stay-home moms, and then the next generation came up at a time when maybe everybody was a latchkey kid. Now we have children who are pretty much shuttled from daycare to grandparents to one place or the other. They never have downtime or alone time. They're almost always scheduled out for their own safety or for just to be somewhere. But there's nobody really engaging with them to teach them anything about how to cook your own food or with real ingredients. It's easy to go to most people eat out. They get fast food or they eat at restaurants or they get takeout now. That was unheard of 20 years ago. Now it's everybody does it. So who knows how to fend for themselves and cook or sow something or dig a hole and plant something. These are things that just don't happen, and there's a reason we're supposed to engage with each other and engage with our environment. But kids don't even get the opportunity, not even in school. There used to be classes in school where you could learn to build things or do things, but now those are either cut from the budget or they're considered classes you don't take if you're on the college track.
Right.
So why should it be my problem? I mean, it's not even necessarily my problem, but I don't understand any adult who feels that their life is so busy or so important that they don't have room in it for their children's friends and loving, extending. I think you have to have a particular state of mind to begin with, and we don't have that sense of welcoming or a sense of loving our neighbors as ourselves or anything. We don't just have that anymore innately. We like to keep to ourselves. We all live in our own little silos, and we show people on Facebook what we want them to see about our lives, the good moments, but we don't ever show the difficult ones. And so I don't know, but I just think it's
right.
It's something we're not teaching our children. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so we only have a couple minutes left, and I was thinking that, maybe there's somebody out there who's listening, and they've been thinking about, I wish that I was a more kind person, or I wish that I could think of something that I could do to help others, and they're struggling to come up with something. And you had a story about your own son that I think is pretty instructive. And it doesn't have to apply just to your kids or your family. It can apply to friends that you've maybe lost touch with or whatever. But in terms of advice for how to be a kinder or more helpful person, sometimes from this story, it sounds like all you really need to do is just reach out to somebody and ask them how they're doing and actually give them your full attention when they start answering you. So tell me about that story real quick, and then we'll close up.
I just was saying that, when my son was a senior in high school, we'd gotten to the point where he was busy, I was busy, we weren't connecting too much, our hours didn't collide too much, and he'd come home from school and want to relax and unwind. But I felt the need to connect with him as a parent and as a person, and I felt there may be some things going on in his world that he might want to talk about. So I asked him one day if he'd meet me for coffee after school, and he looked a little startled, but he agreed to it, and I think he wondered if he was in trouble or if we were going to go bankrupt or something. He didn't know what the problem was, and he met me at Panera Bread, and we had coffee together, and I just sort of opened up myself to him by telling him that I just, really wanted to know how things were going with him and cared about his life and wanted him to know that I'm always there for him. And that allowed him to talk to me in a way that I guess in the everyday rush of our lives, it just never is conducive to it. And we all know what that's like. You come home, everybody's busy, you're cooking a meal, or your kids are plugged into the television, and if you want to talk to your kid, you say, hey, come out here, I want to talk to you about something. Right. And then they're not very receptive. But I felt like breaking it down and just treating him one-on-one like a friend, someone I care about, and showing that we can do that for anybody. But with our kids, sometimes we forget that, especially at that stage of their lives as they're about to go off to college and everything else, they feel very much like a grown-up. I know I did at 16 and 17. I didn't really feel like I needed to be parented that much anymore, even though I did. So you have to find another way to communicate with your kids that's not an authoritarian way. It's not like a my way or the highway, tough love way. They're going to have the rest of their lives to feel tough love from the world. Right. I feel like as a family,
well said.
You have to know that your family is with you, and there's not much that they could ever say to you as a parent that's going to alienate you from them. But they don't know that. So you have to reinforce those things. And I feel like it was a good lesson for me. And I think it's made it possible for us to have those moments. Even now that he's an adult, we still do some things together from time to time, just to have that one-on-one quality person time. I'm still his mom, but I also feel like he regards me as a friend.
Yeah. Well, that's great. One of the things that I want to write about coming up is that I think a lot of us can be under the mistaken impression that everybody else around us is hearing our thoughts and feeling our feelings. And so, you might be in the room and you see your son and you well up with pride, or your daughter does something extra special and you're feeling this like a flood of love. And then you get busy and you never actually express it because you say, oh, well, they know that I love them. I make them dinner every night and, I'm here. I pay the bills, for Christ's sake. But they do need to hear it, because if they don't hear it, they don't know that it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm taken aback every once in a while when I express something like that to one of my kids or one of my extended family kids. It seems that I forget that they're still at a fragile point in their young adult lives where they have no confidence whatsoever in themselves or the future. They really don't. We don't remember the insecurities of growing up into yourself, being a viable person, that look at us and the rest of the adult world and they wonder, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to make it on my own?
Yeah.
What do I know how to do? And it is a harder time for young people to live and find careers and buy a home. I mean, these are things that are, I think they say statistically, this generation of children is not going to be as financially successful or secure as their parents. And that might be a first in our modern history. We've always done better than our parents. Our parents have seen us go off to college and be successful. Whereas this generation of kids, they may not have that because of lots of reasons, but we have to be mindful of the fact that they're on shaky ground, and we need to do what we can to assist. Those days when everybody lived in the same house, grandma, grandpa, like Willy Wonka, everybody sleeping in the same bed or something. But I'm kidding about that. But I mean, families lived together for lots of reasons, and now there's none of that, and they feel responsible to go off and get their own little micro apartment in a bustling city somewhere and figure out how to afford it. But it's okay that it's not happening like that. We just have to talk about the reality of life and set some.
Yeah, I'm convinced though that despite what those stressors are and the anxieties they might feel, if they know for sure that you got their back and they have you as a stable source, that it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
Yeah, I don't know why we feel it's so important for everybody to be independent by the time they're 18 or 22 and stand on their own 2 feet. It's a hard world out there. We should be standing together, holding each other's hands, and holding each other up just in case somebody hits a big hole in the road. Make sure it's like climbing a mountain, and everybody ties those ropes on for a reason, because it's a little bit risky. And if somebody falls, somebody's going to be there to make sure you don't hit the ground hard.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's if there's anything that sounds like an ending to a conversation with a little inspirational hitch, that would be it.
That's
right there.
It. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good.
So,
Glad.
Carol, thank you very much for being on the show
welcome.
and giving us your insight. And I feel like that was an inspirational conversation. Listeners,
thank you for creating a platform, so that people can expand their minds a little bit and think outside of their boxes.
Great. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. And I'll talk with everybody next week. Thanks for listening.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are thought, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a...
IPMNation.com